Okay, well, I am going to talk about this, but a couple of things before I do. And I think the first thing is just to thank Aqua and the whole team, and Penny, and the centre. And it is actually on my part a very heartfelt thank you. This is the first time I've been back on the Sheffield campus since I left. And it's a lovely feeling to come back to this centre in particular and to this programme. So congratulations to the centre and to Aqua, and it's one of the things that makes me sad I've left that I can't be a bigger part of this initiative. So thank you. And the other thing that I want to say, again, before I start talking about this, is I kind of feel like maybe I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, because I'm going to say, look, this is what I am. I am not a childhood studies person. I was always a member of the centre, and I always loved it, and I really enjoyed being in it. But I'm not somebody whose background is in childhood studies. And this is the AA bit. I am a political scientist. I always find that very hard to say, that's why it feels like my AA moment. But it's actually quite important to say where I come from, because it shapes, like all our disciplines, are incredibly shaping of how we think. And the longer you've sat in a discipline, even when you've been like me, struggling to get out of it and make interdisciplinary links your whole career, you carry the markers of the training you had or have. And you also carry with you, I think anyway, the things that made you want to do the discipline you studied. So, is there anybody here who wants to come out as a political scientist, or, you know, am I alone entirely?
Or undergraduate?
Great, okay. Well, I'm just going to say a couple of things that's going to sound like level 1 politics. Because it is quite important, I think, for what I'm going to say later. What I do is a little subsection of politics and international relations, which is sometimes called development politics, because politics isn't very good, like most social science disciplines that deal with the rest of the world, that is most of the world. So what that means is it's everything that we would kind of lump into something called the Global South, or, you know, sometimes it goes by the more ambiguous name of global politics, which is the title I now have. And what that's all about, what sits at the essence if you do politics or development politics, what your key kind of questions are all about. Politics is a discipline, it's about power. Like level 1 politics, you know, they say, what do we do in politics? You'd say, what we do is we study power. But what we do in particular is study public displays of power, the public face of power. The public-private split is quite important in the formation of that discipline. And so what we tend to do is look very much at public displays, public exercises, the process by which power is exercised in the public domain, public sphere. That means that you often look at institutions. That's why the interventions I've made here have generally been about things like regulation. But it's about more than that. What at the core of politics as well sits a big debate, which is like the value of ideas versus the value of material interests. That can translate into a debate about, do people behave the way they behave, and do institutions behave the way they behave because they have material interests at stake. A bit of a debate yesterday when I was here about whether partner organisations from Young Lives in India behave the way they do because of their class position, material interest, or do they behave the way they behave because they have sets of beliefs. You know, the philosophical tradition is quite strong, the idea that we're guided by independent ideas, that I might have a belief in equality, and that actually might mean that I'm willing to pay a lot more taxes. And so actually I'm not guided there by my material interest, I'm guided by a belief, by a view, by an idea. So that kind of debate is very strong. And I've been thinking when I've been here, I think the ideational aspects of child labour versus the material aspects of child labour are also quite important, because when we think about why do institutions think the way they do, sometimes it might be about power, material interest, sometimes it might be about ideas, beliefs, views, notions. So that kind of debate is really big, and I'm hoping that, you know, we'll talk a little bit about it now. And I suppose the other thing that again is huge in my discipline, and therefore huge for me, is a debate around, how do I put it? It's like if we study power and we're interested in the public face of power, one of the things we're really interested in is the global political economy, because that is a huge space in which power is transmitted, displayed, exercised. And what that means is we're also very interested, therefore, in what I would call the rapacious capitalism. Capitalism is rapacious is redundant. Capitalism, the operation of capitalism. And I suppose this comes from, and this ties into the idea of regulation. And this is a very normative view, actually, but I have to say it's one I share. Which is that without regulation, capitalism will be even more rapacious. So I have a normative as well as a disciplinary interest in thinking about the regulation of capitalism, because without it, I think everybody's lives, probably also the lives of the rich in some ways, but certainly the lives of the poor, will be much worse. And that is a very strong normative view, I accept that, but it's very fundamental, I think, and I think it can be demonstrated as well, that if we don't regulate the owners of production, we will have a much worse life. And it makes me personally, and probably my discipline, very suspicious of any idea that you can have caring capitalism or caring capitalists unless they're regulated and unless there are structures in place that enforce that. And I think that might be something, that's a very long-winded introduction, but that might be something that explains why I think about child labour in ways that are slightly different from the ways that some of you might think about child labour. So that's my disclaimer at the beginning of the talk. Okay. So I've got notes, I've got PowerPoints, but I'll probably create from both. So I don't want to spend I think it's probably spent too long on the disclaimer. I don't want to spend too long on this because I think we've all agreed, you know, we know this, it's come out several times. We know international institutions have a very strong normative position around taking children out of the workplace, and in particular protecting them from exploitative and dangerous work. We all now know that the new global goals, the SDGs, agreed last year, are going to shape international development programs over the next 15 years. We know that they have got targets in them that will have some impact on child labour. And indeed, ending child labour, not just exploitative and dangerous, but in all its forms. And it's partly in there because, I mean, I did some interviews in the ILO just a couple of months ago around this, and it's partly in there because the ILO decided that the only thing they were going to fight for in the SDGs were decent work. That's hugely important to the ILO, this concept of decent work, and that's what they pushed, sometimes to the exclusion of other things. We know it's a very moral and normative debate, we know that. And we also know, and I think this is also important, I think Ginny made some mention of it, we know that there is no agreed approach in social science to thinking about child labour, nor indeed methodologically about how to study it. So in IPE, in international political economy, it's very strong, influenced by the idea of the global political economy and where child labour sits in that as a form of exploitation, in the sense of not thinking about the child as being exploited, but exploitation of the labour process in general. There's a growing literature on forced labour, as I'm sure you all know, which, you know, some people find very, very problematic, and free labour. And then there's, I think, an approach that many of you would share, which is ethnographic approaches, very qualitative, very keen to engage with the subject, the person who is working or being exploited. And then there's this huge industry of economics, which is dominated, I think, the thinking of international organisations. Now, in all of that, what I'm interested in is something slightly different. I'm interested in two things. I'm interested in human rights. Before I started working on children, I worked on human rights in general, and I've done some stuff on rights and migration, for example. But I am very interested in what children's rights might mean, and regulation. And I'm interested in that. They come together partly because you speak to the ILO, you speak to UNICEF. What they're interested in is producing something called rights-based regulation. So they do come together. Their view is they seek to regulate on the basis of both a normative code of human rights, universal human rights, and a codified set of agreed human rights that have been ratified by states, things like Convention on the Rights of the Child, ILO agreements. So my question is always, what does human rights mean then in relation to working children, and what does or what should rights-based governance of children look like? So they're the kind of questions, and I suppose the site of where I work isn't necessarily always with the children, but the site is often up here, if you like, at the governance level. So I do have other questions, but I think, you know, they've come out really in the discussion. So, I mean, what I said I was going to do today when I thought about it was I was going to talk about this. And I suppose, as well as kind of emphasising, you know, regulation, I think for me, if there's a take-home from what I want to give and leave behind, is this thing that I've been banging on actually since I started, since the first day, which is we need to problematise the notion of the global south for all sorts of reasons. But one reason we need to problematise it is the debate on child labour is shifting to the global south. We can't think about it as a debate that takes place here. It's actually much more important in societies where there are children working. And that debate is not just a debate going on around the children or the family or the household or the community. It's happening at the level of politics. It's happening in parties, in Congress, in institutions, in all sorts of ways. It's a political debate within the global south, and we need to learn to listen to that debate, not just to listen to the voices of children. We need to hear the political debates that are going on around child labour. I'm going to discover, and this is my take home, that there isn't one position, there isn't one debate. There's lots of different debates going on here. And so this is my take home. This debate can no longer be framed as a question of the West versus the rest. You know, we have some idea that children in the West should live some closeted life, and we try to export that, and we get pushback. That's too simple. It might always have been too simple, but it's certainly too simple now, because, of course, in all sorts of ways, power is shifting, power is gone, the West is on the decline. It's over. The golden era, that was, you know, everybody came to Britain to study, that's going to be gone in 50 years and 100 years. It's over, Western power's over. Our economic might, for good or ill, is gone. And what we've got is a world which is dominated increasingly, and will be more so in the future, by places that are not here in Europe or in North America. You can take a view that that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a fact. And so it makes no sense anymore to think in those terms. And we have to think much more carefully about what the South means. I'm not going to worry about that for a minute. And I'm not even going to worry about that for a minute. What I'm going to skip to for a minute is Yeah, maybe we'll stop. Maybe we'll look at this for a minute. One of the disjunctures in all of this is that we have a system of regulation which is very much based upon Western authority. And we have a system, we have a global system around the UN, around global governance, which is a leftover in many ways from the post-war, I guess the post-45 or post-Second World War settlement. So there's a disjuncture between economic power and the rising West, as it's sometimes called, and a structure of governance of the world which is at odds with that material power. And there's a big debate going on at the moment. Should Britain still have a seat at the Security Council? It's unthinkable to British elites that they wouldn't have a seat at the Security Council. But it's not unthinkable to most countries in the world that Britain shouldn't have a seat in the Security Council, because why? Britain is on the decline. So we have this embryonic global regime centred on and managed by the ILO. The ILO, hugely significant because it's a social democratic body, the ILO. The ILO, loads of mistakes, loads of problems, loads of errors. But what it has at its heart is a vision that capitalism should be regulated, and that we will only get regulated capitalism if we strengthen trade unions. And that the point of labour regulation is about strengthening the voice of unions and workers in that process of governance. So there's the ILO with this social democratic vision of how you govern the world. And it's been seeking to do that since 1919 when it was formed. It's very closely tied actually in many ways to the EU at the moment. And this embryonic global regime that the ILO set up to regulate labour, and in particular child labour, it pootled along. It was, doing quite well, but it received, and I think this is why it's increasingly the focus of attention, it received a major boost in terms of its authority to speak about child labour and its capacity to try and discipline countries of the South into its own way of thinking about child labour in the 1990s. But for people my age, the 1990s is an epoch-breaking moment. We remember it really, really well. The world changed. It was visible. You felt it. It happened. The world shifted in the 1990s as the wall came down in Berlin. And as a result of that, what we see is an outpouring of belief, lasted a few years, that the world could be remade in a liberal mould. Fukuyama wrote The End of History at this point, and the idea of the end of history was, look, actually the major tensions, the ideological tensions of the world were over. We are now all going to be liberal, not neoliberal, liberal. It has a kind of economic side, look, the market. It's going to be the end of kind of the idea of state capitalism associated with communism, but also associated with liberalism is a belief in the individual and a belief in human rights. And so there's a very peculiar legacy, very ambiguous legacy out of this era of high liberalism, which is partly a belief in the value of the individual and therefore the value of human rights, and partly a belief in the market. It's very James-based idea about liberalism. But whatever, in that period in the 90s, there's a real accentuation of not just liberal ideas, but of power accruing in the centre of the global order around liberalism. And for what that means for child labour is this regime took off. So when we look at things like minimum age convention, as Michael said yesterday, 1973, for years it limped on and nobody ratified it of any value, and suddenly in the 90s it takes off, because both the idea of regulation and the authority from the centre to try and push it increases. And so there's a whole series of initiatives. The ILO has all this money suddenly to create the IEPC in 1992, and off it goes to particular countries to try and work very closely and to try and fund programmes nationally that will seek to eliminate or to reduce or to implement the convention. And of course we have 182 in 1999, this attempt to, if we can't get the minimum age, if we can't get rid of every kind of form of child labour, well, at least let's focus on the worst, most exploitative forms. But of course, you know, the concession to states, because this is still a state-centred system, is that the code of conduct for the worst forms of child labour will be left to the national level. So we get that, and that allows a lot of states to ratify, and then we get something that is beyond the kind of institutions that take place at Geneva. Child labour takes off as or the fight against it, takes off as a global idea. So we get the worst form, the World Day against child labour, and suddenly children, you know, in primary schools in the UK are starting to learn a vision of child labour, an idea about child labour, that it exists. And we get in 2012 the Hague Roadmap, which commits countries to trying to implement 182, trying to eliminate the worst forms of child labour. I think by this year, I think the Hague Roadmap promised that. And so we get this much greater, the ILO and NGOs, anti-slavery, Save the Children, you know, really got behind this campaign, as we all know. And it's led to, I think for the first time, real public awareness about it, and we can be a bit sniffy about that public awareness and think we know more than, you know, the average person in the street about it. But the average person in the street's got views about it now. And I was very struck about this. I've got the slavery stitched in the fabric of my clothes, because I was listening to my daughter's, I was in the gym and I was listening to some music she put on my iPod for me. And I have no idea who this is, and suddenly this song comes through and still don't know. Because, you know, you just listen, don't you? But this line really got stuck in my head, because this is some, you know, young person's kind of protest song, why is the world such a terrible place, oh, it's awful, oh, we have to change it, that kind of, you know, song that we're all very familiar with. And then this line comes out, slavery stitched in the fabric of my clothes, and I think, my God, even this singer who knows, you know, who isn't a student of politics or childhood studies or whatever, but he has an awareness about global value chains, as it would be called, in the literature, that, you know, something bought in Primark may well have been stitched up by some child in homework in Delhi. And so the public awareness of this is really, really significant now. And of course, the other one I've put up there is just something that was in The Guardian 2 days ago, is a report of children working. Of course, it's linked to the mobile phone industry, that's the hook, you know, because it's your mobile phone. You're using child labour. So it's very shaping of what people think of as child labour. I know, and you know, still most children don't actually work in factories. I know that, and I'm sure you know that. Most still work in agriculture, 60% of agriculture. There's a growing number, you know, it's maybe 15% working in factories that are tied directly into global value chains, and that's what people see. So anyway, so that's that. I won't carry on with that. I'll move on from there, because I want to pick up this idea at the bottom that I've just mentioned before, no unified critique of child labour from the Global South. What I mean by that is not all countries of the Global South want child labour, and they want to see it eradicated. And that isn't something, I think that is something that we have to think about and not dismiss. Now, if I was giving this talk in a politics setting, I'd really get shouted at for the simplicity of this, but I think it's useful. Just as a way of thinking about the complexity of how the Global South engages differently with child labour. So I think there's at least 4 Souths out there that we need to think about when we think about child labour. There's very clearly radical Islam, and you know, this is a major force in the world today. It's not going away tomorrow. It's not going to be destroyed by the West invading Syria. You know, this is it's a very powerful critique of Western governments. From our perspective, perspective, from my perspective, what radical Islam represents, which is very crucial in this debate, is its restatement of gender roles, because that will have and is having a very significant effect on how governments and states think about childhood and think about what roles young people and children should be playing in the world. And that is going to produce and is producing a vision of the work. And we have to, that's very hard to fit into the debate about child labour, which is either, look, we're forcing this vision onto the global south of elimination. It's very complex. And then the country that, you may have talked about this, but I haven't been here when you have. So what do we do about, what do we think, how do we fit Chinese attitudes to child labour into this debate? This is China of every place in the world at the moment. It must be the image of rapacious capitalism, of super exploitation of workers. It must be the place where that is happening more than anywhere else in the world. Within that process of humiliating, disciplining workers and young people, it's where industrial work is taking off in a big way. There are very significant numbers of children in there. And I think it creates both a policy dilemma and a moral dilemma. Because for people who unproblematically or who defend the right of children to work, and that's a very defensible position in some ways, I think China is a challenge to that position, a very strong challenge to that position, because it's very plain the levels of super exploitation and super humiliation that are going on in the workplace there. So there are two, and I'm not going to say any more about either of them because I'm not a specialist in either. And then I think there's another two sides that we need to think about. There's a major critique of capitalism, of Western capitalism, that's always come out of countries of the global south. It's a long tradition of it. Some of that is now being framed as alternative notions of growth, alternative ideas of well-being and development. I'm not going to talk a lot about that, partly because my example of that might be Bolivia, and we've got better specialists on Bolivia than me in the room, but I think that is really important actually, because the vision here of children and the vision here of the contribution that they're going to make, and they do make, is entirely different from either of those two. So we're going to get, it's another global south again. And then there's this other one here, which I think gets forgotten when people talk about the global south, and it's really important to me to restate this one. There's a whole, most countries of the global south are middle income now, but there's a whole group of middle income countries from the global south that very consciously identify with and seek to lead ideas associated with the European Enlightenment. These are not countries that define themselves as really that different from here, or from European countries, or from Anglo-American countries. I'll give you three examples, and I'm going to talk about one in a bit more detail. Brazil, South Africa, Argentina. These cannot be defined as countries that somehow are that different in their ideational views about the world, in the nature of politics, in the political leadership. And we forget that often when we talk about the global south. And I feel it very passionately because the places I've spent most of my working life are precisely those countries. And I think their positions are also important. And of course, they are growing in importance, both politically and economically. So, I'll just focus here on the first one, just this point really, that we can't keep focusing on the global south, on this debate as somewhere between the West and the global south. I might come back to the other point later. Now, I've got a couple of examples to put some flesh on the bones, and I know I must be getting close to my time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the examples, and certainly not on this one. But let's just, think about Bolivia, because Bolivia is in the forefront in the news around child labour at the moment because of this new code, which has received a terrific amount of publicity from 2014, which I don't know if it's non-compliance with ILO minimum age, or if it's, as I've sometimes tried to think about it, as deviant compliance as opposed to non-compliance. Because non-compliance usually means you don't care. Actually you don't implement anyway. And I think in Bolivia there is a real debate about how best to protect working children. And so it's hard for me to say it's non-compliant, because it's certainly not non-compliant in the sense of some countries which take no action. Bolivia is taking action, and it's taking action with a particular view around the needs and the interests of children who work. So it is non-compliant, but equally it's attempting to comply, if you like, with the idea that young people and children have rights. So I find it very hard to label what's going on in Bolivia, and sometimes I've labelled it deviant compliance as a way of trying to recognise that the debate is real and legitimate. But what we've got as a result anyway is a formal recognition by the government that children from the age of 10 can work if they're self-employed, and from 12 children can work for others, providing it's authorised, and providing there's an assurance that children's other rights in some form are being met. The implementation of this, I'm not going to go there because it's going to be hugely problematic, hugely complex, and no doubt full of errors. But the point I'm trying to make, I suppose, is there is an attempt here going on at pioneering something that works in the Bolivian setting, and I think it'll be very interesting to see how it unfolds. Key actor in this, which of course makes it very interesting here as well, has been the organisation of young working people, and I think without that organisation of young working people, of the NATs as they referred to, we wouldn't have had this piece of legislation. And we probably wouldn't have had this piece of legislation if the NATs hadn't caught the ear of the president of the country as well. Because it is a very controversial piece of legislation within Bolivia itself. It's not that, there's a kind of full national agreement that this is the way to go. Not even within the government. The debate went on for years, for 6 years I think it might have gone on for, and some departments of government were split against other departments of government. Ministry of Labour, I don't think, was very keen, closer to the ILO position. So a very interesting take, I think, on being neither anti-regulation nor pro the ILO position. Argentina, my other example, and I might talk a little bit more about this. Argentina is one of the countries which has sought in a very radical way to go beyond ILO recommendations. Sometimes in the literature it can be called hyper-compliance. They've done more than comply. So here we have 2008. The thing to understand, I suppose, about Argentina is there's a left-wing government. I'm hesitating because it's always hard to define this government, but clearly in many ways interested in socially progressive legislation. Government come into office in 2003, defeated in the polls just last December. So in 2008 the minimum working age was increased from 14 to 16. Now that goes on, it's not the only place that's happened. But what's interesting in Argentina has been the drive to make that policy real, to actually implement it. Laws happen all the time, governments don't implement them. This is one of the ones that the government is trying to put a huge amount of effort into implementing. So if you want to implement something around labour legislation, you have to have a whole bureaucracy of kind of labour inspectors and organisers who'll go out and do it, because you work into the assumption people won't obey the law unless they're made to. Quite not an unreasonable assumption when it comes to employers, I think. So you need this so they've created this unit to protect what they're called working adolescents. And this piece of legislation is quite remarkable in many ways. They've decided they're going to criminalise not the children, but the employers of children. And so the law makes it punishable to up to 4 years in prison if you employ somebody under the age of 16. Nothing punitive happens to the child who's been employed. Clearly they've lost their job. And the only exception to that is parents and guardians. So there is a kind of tolerance there of family labour. That's the point of this. Because family labour in the north of Argentina is common. It's a very rural area. Family employment, agricultural, itinerant employment. This is normal. This piece of legislation isn't aimed at them. It's aimed at factory owners. That's what it's aimed at. It's aimed at criminalising both formal and informal factory owners, because Argentina has quite a big industrial sector. It's not a symbolic piece of legislation. There is an attempt at making it real, and this number has gone up to something like 200 now cases being brought by the government against exploitative, as they would see it, employers of children. Many of these people who are coming are employing not just Argentine children, but of course migrant children who are working in Buenos Aires, and many of the factories employing them are also factories owned by migrants. So it's quite a complex issue. So anyway, what do the cases mean? I think the point that I'm trying to get over is how contentious this issue is within the global south. It's not simple, because debates divide people in the global south. In Bolivia, the debate is hugely contentious, hugely contentious. Governments divided, public opinions divided, civil society is divided. Save the Children came down in favour of the new law in Bolivia. It's really, who would have thought that? And yet some other NGOs really opposed to it, really opposed to it. Human Rights Watch deeply opposed to it. So the divisions in civil society around it being huge. The role of trade unions. In Bolivia, it's been very ambiguous, the role of trade unions. They don't know if they're for it or against it. In Argentina, they really know they're against it. They really know they're against it. And I don't think they're against child labour because they think children are taking their jobs away. I don't think it's about protection of their own work. I think it's a very strong normative view. In Argentina, in particular, I think what's happened is in Argentina, children always work, but political elites and governments really pretended they didn't. If you spoke to people who had been in the government in Argentina in the 1990s, they'd say, no, nobody works here. And after 2001, because Argentina experienced, like a Greek collapse in 2001, it was like that. Children were visible, literally visible all over the streets of the cities, let alone in the countryside, working, asking for money, working on the streets, recycling rubbish. And there was a kind of national mental crisis. We're not a country that has child labour in front of our noses. We might have it up in the north, but we don't have it in front of our noses. And so there was a real sense in which government and society felt obliged to act. I think somebody said to me in interviews we did in Argentina, it's a very fractious country, Argentina, they said this is the one issue that I think unites every single Argentine. None of us believe children should be working. And that's an exaggeration, because obviously families with children who work do believe they should be. But it was a sense in which there was a political and civil elite that believed that. And I think it's very deeply ingrained in this case. I think this is true actually also in South Africa. This belief that progress means children don't work, means that children, in the same way as I believe my daughter should not have been working at the age of 5 or 6, my counterpart in Argentina, Brazil and South Africa believe that too. So I have to take notice of that belief. It's important. And
I can trace it in Argentina, I can trace that belief in Argentine political and civil elites at least back to the 1880s. Legislation in Argentina about where children should be, the place of children, goes back at least to 1919, when there was a law passed that said children should not be working on the streets. So it's not, they could be right or they could be wrong, but it's not something that has bled from here to there. It's something very deeply ingrained. So I was going to say I won't go into this because I think this is another topic. I'm just going to stick with my single point really, which is the complexity and the divisions within the global south. And I think this is the other side, this is, we're talking about childhoods in the global south, and we need to talk about childhoods in the global souths. And as well as listening, I think, to the voice of children, working children, we need to listen to the voice of governments and elites and civil society representatives from those countries of the global south. And we need to take them seriously when they say either we think we need to produce a pragmatic way forward, which is about something that works here, and not actually dismiss that. It's really important to hear it. And then my final point, which is a very normative point, but something that I think, in some ways, and I think this does link into how elites may think in some countries of the global south, this isn't a standalone debate. This isn't a debate which is just about child labour. If you think, as say in Argentina, governments will think children shouldn't be working, then actually what you're thinking is this. It should be recognised as part of a much bigger discussion, which is how we provide decent work, welfare, service provision, and education that is high quality, not just education that you turn up at school and teachers are badly paid and there's no books and things are very difficult. High quality education, which is also one of the SDGs, should be provided, because education for children who are poor, if it's high quality, is hugely valuable and hugely important to their well-being and to their future. And that debate isn't really just a debate about children, it's a debate about taxation, how you pay it, who pays it, and what happens to it. And I think that other side of the debate on child labour is really, really important that we listen to. And so what that means, finally, my final point, is an interdisciplinary point. We need to talk to each other. Especially people who work, as many of you do, with children who work, should be talking to people like me, who work with policymakers who think about child labour. And we need to talk across this divide, probably more than we currently do. That's me.